Welcome to One for All. I'm Mary Summerlot, and I'm here with Steve Baker, our local historian, who's going to tell us about Las Lomas Ranch. This beautiful acreage that we're standing on with this beautiful Queen Anne home behind us is part of original Duarte. Tell us about this home. Tell us about this property.
Thank you, Mary. Where we are today is one of the most historic locations in Duarte. It originally was an 82-acre parcel that was purchased in 1883 by an Ernest Whittaker, who was a resident of Toronto, Canada, but came to Southern California to earn his livelihood. When he bought it, there probably was not much in the way of improvements, but he soon after began planting orange trees and planted all the property that is around us today with brand new, probably seedling oranges. Ernest worked very hard for 3 years, and then his health broke. And he wrote back to Ontario to his sister and her husband and said, "I desperately need your help. I'm ill. I need someone to come and look after me." So Agnes Whittaker Maddock and her husband Junius Arthur Maddock and their 2 small daughters came from Toronto to the Duarte area, and they all lived in the original Andres Duarte ranch house, a low 1-story Duarte adobe house that was on the eastern part of the property. They lived there until 1888. In that year, Ernest died. He did not recover from his illness. It might have even been tuberculosis, we don't know. But Agnes and her husband took over the property, and for 2 years, no, for that same year, they decided that 42 or 82 acres was really more than they needed, so they sold off the eastern part, the 42 acres, to the Bacon family, who were another early Duarte family, and kept the 40 acres for themselves. They built a small 1-story cottage, moved into that from the old adobe, lived there comfortably for about 11 years, and then tragedy struck. One of the outbuildings, maybe a shed, a storage shed of some kind, caught on fire. They had very little in the way of fire protection then, so that shed was consumed with flames, and then from that it went to the main house, so the Maddocks lost everything. They escaped with the clothing they had on their backs, and that was about it. But they did have a large barn. It was far enough away from the fire that it survived, so they moved in there. It provided them with shelter. And then they immediately started plans to rebuild. This time they built a larger, far more impressive house, which is the one we see today, done in the Queen Anne style.
Beautiful.
Yeah. The Queen Anne style was popular in the last quarter of the 19th century, and it featured things such as the dressed granite stone we see there, the patterned shingles, also the corner turret. It's a very typical Queen Anne feature. The first floor of the house is sheathed in horizontal shiplap siding, the second story in a contrasting material, and then there's a very high peaked roof with chimneys, tall chimneys. All of those were examples of architectural style or architectural features that made up the Queen Anne style of architecture. The Maddocks moved into their new house sometime in 1900 and lived here very comfortably until October of 1903, when Mr. Maddock went to the top of the property to check the well that provided the water for the orange grove. There was a belt attachment, a pulley attachment with a belt that apparently lifted the water up from the bottom of the well. He, I guess, was checking on it to see whether it needed oiling. Anyway, he accidentally got his hand stuck in the belt. It pulled him headlong into the well, and he was killed instantly as a result of the accident.
My goodness.
Well, that left Mrs. Maddock with 4 small children, a 40-acre ranch, and no real idea of how to cope with what she had to deal with. However, she had a friend who was a well-established orchardist, and she wrote him and she said, "Won't you please come and help me out?" So he and his family did. She built a small house for them down on Las Lomas Road near the railroad tracks, and he took over the operation of the orange grove. He did so for about 6 years, and then he suffered an attack of appendicitis. And in those days, if you needed an operation, surgical operation for appendicitis, you had to go all the way into Los Angeles, which meant they had to put him in a wagon, get him on the train, and then go from the train into downtown Los Angeles, stretch to the hospital. Anyway, they got him to the hospital, but the delay proved too long, and he succumbed to peritonitis. But by that time, Arthur Maddock, Mrs. Maddock's son, was old enough to take over the operation of the house, of the orange grove, so he did. He married in 1911 to Catherine Jackson of Monrovia, and all the family lived here until sometime after World War I, when Mrs. Maddock and her older daughter, who had never married, moved into another home that Mrs. Maddock built, which was on another location at the head of Vineyard Avenue, tucked away behind the hills. It's not there now. It was the house was removed when the area was redeveloped. But she and her daughter lived there for the rest of their lives, and then Gordon and his family lived here in this house. The Maddocks owned the property into the late 1930s, maybe the early 1940s, and then they sold it and moved actually into Monrovia. But for some 40 years, probably, the Maddocks had this house, and of course they had the property for some over 50 years. And even after the house had passed out of Maddock ownership, the Maddock name was associated with it. It was always known as the Maddock Ranch, even though the Maddocks no longer owned it and lived here.
And thankfully, the people who did move in afterwards kept this house the same.
Right.
And it is beautiful, and in a little while we're going to go take a walk around the
Good.
property and in the property, and we're going to see how they lived in the early 1900s.
At the Doherty Museum, we have some pictures of the house taken shortly after it was completed in 1900, and it's interesting to see the beautiful grove of orange trees, and there, here in the midst of it, is this imposing two-story house. It was very impressive.
They knew how to live.
They knew how to live. And the Maddocks were British. They were both born in England, or at least had family who were born in England. And they were part of a large colony of people in the Doherty area who were from Britain or were British subjects. There were so many people here at one time, they referred to Doherty as the Queen Colony because, of course, at that time, Queen Victoria was the reigning monarch of England. So they kept up their British customs. They would have had high tea on the porch. They would have played croquet on the lawn and things like that. They were far from England, but they didn't want to lose their British identity, so they kept up the customs of their homeland.
Well, we're going to say hello to Claudia Heller, who's out here also touring today.
Good.
As this home has been opened for the first time in quite a long time. And we're going to talk to her and see what she thinks about this, and then I would like you to take me around.
Good. I look forward to that.
All right.
Thanks.
Thank you. And we're here with Claudia Heller, who is the president of the Doherty Historical Society. And what do you think about this tour today?
Well, the first time I met this house personally, I was a tour guide for the Monrovia Old Home Preservation Group, and this house was on the tour. And I was very impressed at that time, not only with the house and the way it was furnished, but the grounds, and the fact that it's one of the last remaining historical houses in our city, and it would be a shame to ever see it go. So the Historical Society would like to see this house preserved at all times for future generations to come and see what a Queen Anne style home is like, and be able to walk around the grounds, and it's just like an oasis in this area.
It is.
So we have developed a resolution declaring the fact that we would like to always see this house preserved for future generations to see. And we stand behind that, and we hope that 10, 15, 30, 50, 100 years from now, people will come and be able to walk around, and they'll see the modern houses here, but they'll also see a piece of Doherty history.
Very important.
It is.
To remember our roots.
Right. And I think it's interesting that when the Maddock family came in 1886 and built this house, little did they know there would be people standing in front of it today saying we want to see this house preserved for all time. So I think that's an interesting part of it also.
Thanks, Claudia.
Okay, thank you.
We're going to take a tour now of the house. Steve Baker's going to take us around, and we'll see the rest of it.
Well, I'll tag along.
Okay.
Okay.
Great. So this is the original entrance?
The original front entrance. The porch was not enclosed originally. It extended all the way around, but it was an open porch. But at some point, they decided it would make a wonderful sunroom, and so windows were installed, and it is a wonderful area. When you came to visit the Maddocks, this is the way you would have come in.
Yeah. Here we are in, what would this have been called in 1900?
Well, when the house was first built, there were two parlors, formal parlors, on either side of an entry hall. The parlor to the right is still there. The parlor to the left was made larger by taking out the partition wall and making it one large living room. So where we're standing now originally was a long entry hall. Now it's part of the living room.
Okay.
The original fireplace is still here from 1900. It's a quarter sawn oak and has some wonderful classically inspired detailing. There's some egg and dart molding around here, of course, the turned pillars, some nice turnings up on the top. Quarter sawn refers to a way of cutting oak at an angle so that it showed off the grand The very best advantage. All the original tile has survived, the original surrounding the firebox and so forth. Of course, this would have been symmetrically placed when there was a hallway. There would have been exactly the same space on either side. The Victorians like to have nice symmetrical rooms. It's got a nice corner window, though, to sort of break the monotony of a regular square corner. This would have been probably the family parlor. Then the one on the other side, which is a little smaller, was probably the formal parlor where you would be ushered into and entertained by Mrs. Maddock when you came to visit.
Beautiful view of the right here with all of the roses and beautiful vegetation out there. Gorgeous.
When we go across the hallway into what would have been probably the more formal parlor. Again, we have a beautiful corner-sawn oak fireplace, mantel, original, again, columns, nice classical detailing, and too, the original, in this case, red tile has survived. Again, this placed on an angle, probably, well, two reasons. There's another fireplace immediately in back of it, which means they could share a chimney, but also made it a little more interesting than to have just been tucked on a wall flat somewhere. And probably the nicest area of this room is the area in the corner turret. Built-in window seats, wonderful comfortable cushions. I mean, this is a great place to sit in the morning, relax, enjoy a cup of coffee. Staffords call this the morning room for that very reason. It's a room you would enjoy being in the morning
I'd like
when
to
the
sit
sun
down
is
right
coming.
now.
Do you want to?
Have a cup of coffee?
Would be great. Just a real nice area, very comfortable and very inviting. I'm not sure that the oak floors are original to the house. They've been here a good long time, but the fact that the flooring runs through continuously, where there would have been a wall originally, makes me think that maybe at the time they remodeled the house and took out that partition wall, they probably put in the nice oak hardwood floors. Then the traffic flow quite nicely into the dining room. This is a beautiful fireplace. Again, granite, probably taken from the San Gabriel River. There was a huge quantity there, and many people went down to the river and just selected what they needed. It was at a time when there weren't millions of people going after things, so you could do that and not deplete the landscape. The mantel is nice Douglas fir, as is all the woodwork downstairs, nice straight grain in it. Interesting about this wood, it's from Oregon. And in the early days of this century, they didn't call it Douglas fir as we do now, they call it Oregon pine. And that was because fir in the eastern part of the United States had a very bad reputation as a construction wood, apparently. It warped easily and twisted. And they wanted to market this product, which really was a good material in the East. They thought, we'll never be able to sell it if we call it Douglas fir. So
Yet
they
all
called
these years
it
later,
Oregon
here it
pine. Here it is. No, it's good material. But as I say, they called it Oregon pine because they needed to disguise the fact that it really was a fir. Nice, again, built-in window seats across the end of this room. Interest with the diamond-shaped panes of the window, and then the entrance to the huge wraparound porch that's now enclosed as a sun porch.
What is this porch? I love this.
Somebody asked me earlier about the slope on the floor, and I explained that when it was open, of course, you would want to have the capability of the water running off in case there was a driving wind from the southwest.
I understand.
Yeah. The stonework, as you can see, it's native granite, probably all selected from the San Gabriel riverbed, neatly cut and dressed in the patterns, and the joints, mortar joints themselves dressed up with a little beading just to give it that finishing touch. And again, this would have been a wonderful place to be in the afternoon with a breeze.
With a view?
With a view, have your high tea out here.
And what would the view have been?
Probably just one long expanse of orange trees in the immediate foreground, and then off in the distance would be the San Gabriel River. You know, in those days it sort of meandered wherever it wanted to. And then in the far distance you could probably see the Pointy Hills quite easily.
Great.
Great place to be. Nice built-in buffet, original installation, and as you can see, the doorway, the cupboard doors open into the kitchen on the back side, which made it very handy if you were serving. You could have your servant and a